Good morning, America. Today we got something juicy for you.
Today's topic is something we've been all hearing about.
The Red Scare is here, and these Italians are bringing some fear, so let's get into the topic.
The Red Scare arose between 1919 and 1920 and was the whole concept of whose Americanism was suspect. The Red Scare was a godsend to conservative business people who used it to break the backs of the fledgling unions. Labor's calls for closed or all-union shop was denounced as Sovietism in disguise. Sovietism meaning the practices and principles of a Soviet government, especially as it implies communism. This led to employers hailing their own anti-union campaign for open shops as the American plan. So you're probably asking, what does this have to do with anything we're about to talk about? Well, now it's time to get into the Sacco and the Vanzetti case. But before we do that, let's get some background on these guys.
Nicola Sacco was a young man who emigrated from Italy to the United States in 1908 with his brother, and they both settled in Milford, Massachusetts. At first, he was a water boy, then he got promoted to pick and shovel. After it being too cold to work outdoor, he decided to take lessons on shoe trimming. Sacco later on became an excellent shoe trimmer, worked at the Milford Shoe Company. Soon, Nicola Sacco got involved in left-wing politics, which support social equality and egalitarianism, and often in opposition to social hierarchy. During one anarchist gathering, Sacco met Bartolomeo Vanzetti in Plymouth. They soon became friends and often attended political meetings together. Now let's talk about the other guy, Bartolomeo Vanzetti.
Now let's talk about the other guy. Bartolomeo Vanzetti was born on June 11, 1888. He immigrated into the United States at the age of 20 in 1908. Vanzetti settled in Plymouth, Massachusetts, where he worked as a kitchen helper in New York. And after losing his job, he drifted to Boston, where he worked odd jobs, becoming a fish peddler, somebody who did door-to-door sales. Surprise, surprise, Vanzetti was shocked by the way the working-class immigrants were treated in the United States. This led him to join the left-wing politics. Left-wing politics supports social equality and basically involves a concern for those in the society who adherents perceive as disadvantaged relative to others, as well as a belief that there are unjustified inequalities that need to be reduced or abolished. Basically the whole concept of socialism and communism. But then again, the Americans are afraid of communism, which is a problem that we shall address in the future. Okay, I know you've been hearing a lot and we still haven't got to the juicy stuff, but we just got a little bit more information to cover, and then you can hear about what's the juice.
Sacco and Vanzetti had many similarities in their background, their beliefs, and their actions. They were Italian immigrants. They believed in anarchy and were atheists, and because of their opposition towards the World War I, they were also draft dodgers. The two took part in protest meetings against the war. However, these protests from socialist, pacifists, and labor organizations only served to further unite the government and business interests in favor of the war. Organizations against the war saw themselves increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Opposing the war, Sacco and Vanzetti fled together to Mexico. They did this to avoid being drafted into the U.S. Army for the Great War. They returned to America after World War I had ended. Vanzetti began reading about industrial society and revolt. The two of them began distributing anarchist and revolutionary literature. During the period of the Red Scare, Sacco and Vanzetti's anarchist viewpoints had made them a target from the very beginning. Now let's talk about why and how these two men have been receiving so much attention.
And now we can get to this murder case. A paymaster and a security guard killed during a mid-afternoon armed robbery of a shoe company in South Braintree, Massachusetts. Yes, I did say they were killed. Big surprise, huh? Paymaster Fred Parmenter and Alessandro Berardelli, whose image we cannot find, were shot several times while trying to move payroll boxes on their New England shoe company. They had about $15,000 on them, and the two armed men with pistols that were the suspects also had $15,000 on them. Coincidence, huh? And now I think it's time for these detectives to dig a little deeper, because stuff not adding up. Well, technically, the stuff is adding up, which is why they need to dig a little deeper. So let's get to that. let's get to this investigation.
The deed had been done. The two victims' blood was on someone's hand. But the question is, whose hand was it? Could it possibly be an anarchist, or worse, a commie, who haunt patriot Americans day and night? Witnesses described the two suspected murderers as Italian men. The scene was described by witnesses and further investigations. While the murder was happening, a car pulled up. The two murderers were said to have thrown the 2 boxes of money into the car, and they jumped in and drove away. The car was found abandoned in the woods several days later. The car was left in the direction of a town called Cochesset. Chief Stewart of Bridgewater was now on the lookout for 2 Italians with a car in Cochesset. Chief Stewart linked the murder of the paymaster and guard to a gang-related crime. Mario Buda, also known as Mike Boda, was an ardent anarchist who was involved in much of the Massachusetts anarchist activity. He met Sacco during the Hopedale strike of 1913 and also met Vanzetti 3 years later in Plymouth during the Cordage strike of 1916. Buda was accused of being a co-felon with Sacco and Vanzetti in the South Braintree holdup and was questioned by Police Chief Stewart himself. Boda was a suspect because his car was found in a garage for repairs in Cochesset. However, Boda was one step ahead of the authorities and fled back to Italy. However, Chief Stewart still continued to work on his theory that a gang was involved with the murder. Chief Stewart notified the garage at which Boda's car was parked for repairs. He demanded to be notified when and whoever came to pick up Boda's car. Sacco and Vanzetti go to collect Boda's car. However, the car was not available and the Italians left, but the police were also notified. Sacco and Vanzetti were arrested on a streetcar. Boda had fled to Italy. Orciani, another suspect to be a part of the Braintree gang, was also arrested the next day. However, Orciani was at work and had an alibi, therefore he was let go. Sacco, unfortunately, had taken a day off from work on the day of the murder, April 15th. Vanzetti, due to his odd jobs, was also found guilty due to his lack of alibis. Now let's get more into it.
They were both arrested and charged with the crime of the murder of the paymaster and his guard. Since they both carried guns, it was already a fact that they made false statements upon arrest. Sacco had a .32 caliber handgun, which was the same type that was used to kill the security guard, and the bullets from the gun was of the same manufacturer as those recovered from the shooting. So, we got ourselves another coincidence. They both were said not to have a criminal record. However, Vanzetti was identified as a participant in a previous robbery attempt of a different shoe company. I mean, this man just can't get enough. So I know you guys are dying to hear what happens in court, right? Am I right? You're not gonna answer? Okay, moving on.
And so the trial begins. On May 31st, 1921, Sacco and Vanzetti were brought to trial before Judge Webster Thayer. Thayer was in charge of the Massachusetts Supreme Court. Again, due to Sacco and Vanzetti being Italian, atheist, anarchist, and draft dodgers, the jury and judge were very prejudiced towards their trial. On July 14th, 1921, Sacco and Vanzetti were found guilty, and they were later convicted and sentenced to death. This caused an anti-radical sentiment, and the trial was viewed as unlawfully sensational. The defendant had failed to come up with evidence, and the later found evidence was discredited. Now that it was declared that Sacco and Vanzetti were guilty and were convicted, Sacco and Vanzetti were receiving huge amounts of support from the masses. Now let's get into the support that Sacco and Vanzetti received so generously.
Now let's talk about the support of Sacco and Vanzetti. Sacco and Vanzetti, recognizing the uphill battle ahead, tried to put this fear to their advantage. Millions of dollars were raised for their defense by the radical left around the world, by drumming up support from the left wing with claims that the prosecution was politically motivated. The American embassy in Paris was even bombed in response to the Sacco Vanzetti case. A second bomb intended for the embassy in Lisbon was intercepted. The masses react. Socialists and radicals have sporadic protests held in Massachusetts, around the world for the release of Sacco and Vanzetti. Bombs were also set off in New York City and Pennsylvania. Protest was held because Celestino Mataros confessed in 1925 he participated in crime with the Joe Morello gang. People believed they were convicted for their radical anarchist beliefs. So this angered the socialists and the radicals, and they said, "We need to make some changes," which is also the reason for all the bombings and protests.
Although many thought that Sacco and Vanzetti received a less than fair trial, all attempts for retrial failed, on the grounds of false identification. Additional evidence was presented, the ballistics test on the murder weapon. Prosecution experts testified that it was Sacco's gun that was used for the murder. Yet the defense counter-argued. The evidence was discredited, yet more evidence came back around. Celestino Maderos confessed to the crime of killing the paymaster and his guard with the Morelli gang. Yet the state Supreme Court refused to upset the verdict. This was because the trial judge had the final power to reopen a case on grounds of additional evidence during that time. Fate was not on Vanzetti and Sacco's side. Sacco and Vanzetti put forth a clemency request. Clemency, under the criminal justice system, is the act by an executive member of government of extending mercy to a convicted individual. They requested clemency from the Massachusetts Governor Alvin T. Fuller, who refused to use his power of clemency. There was no escaping for Sacco and Vanzetti, and on August 23rd, Sacco and Vanzetti were electrocuted. They were now done facing the jury, the court, the attorneys, the defense, and the prosecution. All they had to face now was the electric chair.
Opinion has remained divided on whether Sacco and Vanzetti were guilty as charged, or whether they were innocent victims of a prejudiced legal system and a mishandled trial. Some writers have claimed that Sacco was guilty, but that Vanzetti was innocent. Many historians believe, however, that the two men should have been granted a second trial in view of their trial's significant defects. Now that you know so much about this Sacco and Vanzetti case, let's put your knowledge to the test. Question number 1. Whose gun matched with the one used to kill the paymaster and his guard? Was it A. Vanzetti, B. Sacco, C. Boda, or D. Morelli? Da-na-na-na-na-na, I'm giving you time to think, You have 4, 3, 2, 1. Answer!
It was Sacco! Sacco! So that means answer B! If you got that, you got it wrong!
And now, time for question number 2. How old was Vanzetti when he came to America? Is it A, 19, B, 32, C, 18, or D, 20? Time for you to think. 3, 2, 1. Answer! Just saying, if you guess D, the age 20, that means you are on the right track. Question number 3. Sacco and Vanzetti were A. Italian, B. Moroccan, C. German, or D. Liberian? And I'm waiting for you to answer as you hear my beautiful voice sing. If you got this one wrong, I really don't know what to tell you because it was really simple. So it was A, Italian. Question number 4. Who escaped the scene of murder before anyone else did? Was it A, Sacco, B, Vanzetti, C, Morelli, or D, Boda? Waiting for you to find your answer in 4, 3, 2, 1. Answer! If you picked A, guess what? You're wrong because it's D, Boda. Question number 5. What year was Vanzetti and Sacco electrocuted? A, 1923, B, 1925, C, 1927, or D, 1929?
Now I'm waiting for you to find the correct answer. You are running out of time. You're halfway there. 4, 3, 2, 1. If you answered C, 1927, then you got yourself a correct answer. How many did you get right? Because I know that there may be a surprise for the winner. Maybe there won't be. You never know. You never know. Thank you for joining us once again for this lovely episode of Newsflash, and stay tuned for the next one coming up.